Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a special episode of Newsroom. Today is the 4th of June 2021 and we are going to talk about climate change, the World Environment Day that is going to happen tomorrow. And Pakistan has the privilege of being the global hosts this time at this World Environment Day. The theme is going to be ecosystem restoration, and in fact it's going to be a discussion on the decade of ecosystem restoration in Pakistan and across the world. At the same time, today a special report is also being taken out by the United Nations that is entitled Inclusive Wealth of Pakistan, the Case of Investing in Natural Capital and Restoration. What has Pakistan done? Pakistan has invested in the 10 billion tree tsunami. Pakistan has invested in the e-vehicle policy. Pakistan has invested in the no plastic use policy, and there are so many other things that Pakistan has put into place in order to curtail the effects of climate change, because Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries due to the effects of climate change. We'll be talking about that in detail with our two guests, but before that, let's watch this special report.
The world is still grappling with the rampage inflicted by COVID-19, but another challenge is looming large on the horizon. Climate change and ecosystem degradation could pose challenge on a scale beyond living memory. Environmental degradation, much like pandemic, acts as a threat multiplier, increasing vulnerability to harm economic empowerment and the breakdown of social systems. Furthermore, the communities worst hit by pandemic are most vulnerable to hazards posed by depreciating environment. The most important question is how we can face these climate-induced risks to minimize them most. Being the worst-hit country from the climate change, Pakistan has robustly advocated the urgency to mitigate the climate disaster at virtual 5th UN Environment Assembly. Being responsible global actor, Pakistan lent enough impetus to ecosystem restoration by state-sponsored ambitious environmentally resilient initiatives such as Prime Minister Imran Khan's Clean Green Pakistan program, 10 billion tree tsunami program, protected areas initiatives, ban on single-use plastic bags, Recharge Pakistan program and urban resilient human settlement project. These climate milestones substantially circumvented the climate bomb ticking across Pakistan and the region. The potential for Pakistan's economy to expand and develop sustainably largely depends upon the management of and investment in its natural capital. The effort by the government, especially after 2018, has paid a rich dividend, and now the natural capital like forest, wetland and natural areas are on rise. International community acknowledged these healing interventions of Pakistan, and thus Islamabad earned the honor to host World Environment Day 2021, marking the launch of United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2021 to 2030. Pakistan's enthusiastic hosting of World Environment Day depicts its commitment to lead the charge for all nations to restore damaged ecosystems through the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. According to a report issued by United Nations Environment Programme 2021, Pakistan has already set the model of ecosystem restoration for global community. Thus, Pakistan is well placed to be a pioneer in both restoration initiatives and regional level natural capital and countries' wealth management. They are cornerstone of sustainable development goals.
Now to talk more about all the policies that Pakistan has put into place in order to curtail the effects of climate change, because Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable countries because of this whole global phenomenon. We've been joined by two important guests. One is in the studio, the other is on Skype. In the studios, we've been joined by the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister as well as the Federal Minister on Climate Change, Mr. Malik Amin Aslam. Thank you very much, sir, to have joined us.
Thank you very much.
And and online, we've been joined by Andersen. She is the Under Secretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme that is headquartered in Nairobi in Kenya. Thank you very much, Inger, also to have joined us.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Now let's begin with you, Amin Aslam Saab. I have met you at various intervals and I've always seen you very determined to work towards alleviating or removing the effects of climate change in Pakistan. How much, in your point of view, have you succeeded so far?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I think, this is an ongoing struggle and the challenge is really huge. In Pakistan, at least we've put the direction right. And I think that what we've been successful is to put the direction of development right. And we have done that by making nature an ally of our development. We have decided that we cannot fight this fight with nature. It's a fight we cannot win. We have to get nature on our side and we have to rebalance our relationship with nature. And all our initiatives are based on that philosophy of development. whether we talk of our 10 billion trees or our protected area initiative, Recharge Pakistan, all of them are based on this philosophy that we have to reset and rebalance our relationship with nature and focus on the restoration of our ecosystems. Once we do that and once we start investing in nature, nature always pays you back. We have seen it in the KP province when we invested in the billion tree tsunami project. It came back with a lot of dividends for us. There were 500,000 green jobs that were created. There were political dividends. Youth got attracted to this phenomena because we were talking about their future. So similarly, I think our present political leadership, especially our Prime Minister Imran Khan, he believes in this with all sincerity that unless Pakistan takes this route, Pakistan will have serious challenges in the future. And I think this is the message which is going out this World Environment Day also, that we have to reset our relationship with nature and we have to start it by doing restoration of our ecosystems. So it's not just about one day, it is about a whole decade the UN is going to dedicate towards restoring ecosystems. Because if we don't reset this direction in the next 10 years, then we are in trouble because then our very existence would get threatened for the next century.
Of course, that is a very important point, that our existence will be threatened for the next century. Inger Andersen, how important has been the work done by the United Nations to alleviate the effects of climate change across the world, including in Pakistan?
Well, first of all, let me congratulate Pakistan for hosting this year's World Environment Day. We're delighted and we thank both Prime Minister Imran Khan and, of course, Senior Advisor and Minister Aslam Khan for their leadership. Look, climate change is not something that one agency or one organization or one country or one citizen can solve. It will take all of us. And what is really critical is that we need to see leadership at the national, local, and community level, as well as leadership in private sector. And what is interesting about Pakistan is that this first, starting with the billion tree tsunami, now the 10 billion tree tsunami, is an example of what can be done and how you can, in fact, as we just heard from Mr. Aslam Khan, turn nature around, make nature that ally. Because whilst of course, we need to decarbonize our economies. Of course, we don't need to build any more coal-powered plants. Of course, we need to have green energy. But while we decarbonize, because we can't do that overnight, while we decarbonize, we have nature as a friend that can buy down our CO2 emissions. And while we do that, we are getting local jobs, as we just heard, we're getting forest fruits or whatever the forest may be producing, and we are enriching our soils. We're bringing back nature and biodiversity. And there is a huge opportunity now as we start this decade, the restoration decade, which we will launch tomorrow, this decade of determination by the entire UN system and many others, including the International Union for Conservation of Nature, to spend and to mobilize a global movement for restoring nature. That will mean the finance sector and finding smart infrastructure and nature infrastructure investments, investing in green, investing in nature in cities, investing in nature on farmland, and investing in nature that is degraded. That's the opportunity that lies before us, and we certainly look very much forward to working with all our partners in this regard.
Well, of course, our discussion continues as far as the World Environment Day and the efforts that have been made by Pakistan and the global community to alleviate the effects of climate change is concerned. Let me come back to Malik, Amin, Aslam Saab. Now, there's a report that that is also being released today, the Inclusive Wealth of Pakistan case of investing in natural capital and restoration. It is a joint report, and of course there are contributions from your ministry, there are contributions from the United Nations as well. There's a foreword by Inger Andersen as well. How important is this report in order for the world and Pakistan to move forward?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Inger Andersen and UNEP for providing Pakistan the opportunity to not only host the World Environment Day, but also for this particular report, which is extremely important for Pakistan, because it allows us to understand, are we in the right direction or not? And this is a report which actually looked over the last 20 years since 1990, and then sees how we have developed capital. In the world of today, there are three types of capital which are measured. The first capital is the produced capital, which we all know of, and which, the GDP reports and our budget values. Then there's the human capital, which Pakistan has a lot of, but there's no value given to it. But the third one is most important, and that is natural capital, the natural wealth and the natural resources that Pakistan is endowed with, and all countries are endowed with. How are you using that? Are you just taking away from it, or are you putting something back in? I mean, where is that equation, or the balance between taking back and giving back in? And that is what this report is about. And we would like to, again thank UNEP, because they did it in a very short period of time, and it was a challenging time to get this report out. But this report is providing a very positive, policy direction to Pakistan. What it is saying is that till 2018, we had a lot of, natural capital negatives. So we were just taking back from the natural capital, using those resources for our development, which is also required. But there was very little going back in. But since 2018, especially for two trends, one is on forests, and the other one is on grasslands, we have gone in a positive direction. So that shows us that we have shifted the curve as far as natural capital is concerned, and it has shifted in the right direction. Although we still need to do it on two other sectors, which is the agriculture sector. We're still going negative, and now this government is now focused on the agriculture sector and trying to reverse that particular trend. But what this report is also very clearly showing is that if we are to live this next century, then we have to preserve our natural resources. We have to sustain the natural resources for the coming generations, and we have to reset, as I said, the balance with nature, so that we are not just taking out from it and using it as a resource, but also giving back into it. And there are two things which happen in Pakistan. One is in the north of Pakistan, where we had the billion tree project start in KP province, which gave back to the natural capital. And the other one was in the south of Pakistan, which is the mangrove resource that we have, which is a very rich resource. Pakistan is today the only country in the world which is expanding its mangrove cover. And the Indus Delta is a huge resource for the mangroves. So again, we were adding back into natural capital in the south through the mangroves, and then in the north through the KP's billion tree project. And then going forward, it is also a forward positive projection, because we have an ongoing plan and a project called the 10 billion tree project, which of course is going to add further into it.
All right, and of course 1 billion trees have been planted as we speak.
Yes, and we planted the billion tree just last week, and we're going to celebrate it on the World Environment Day.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, Inger Andersen, when one goes through the report, there are three key messages that arise from the analysis of the report. First, that policy decisions must acknowledge and properly integrate the trade-offs between different types of capital. The second, that weighing up decisions on investment must involve understanding and integrating the social and market prices of the measured assets. And thirdly, the asset side of the national balance sheet should continue to include the multiple assets of human capital and natural capital produced as well. How important are these 3 points, in fact, for the countries to understand how to move forward?
Look, for so long we have assumed that we can measure our well-being and our health and wealth by just looking at GDP income, or by looking at a better educated population. Both are very valuable, but we can't do that if we are essentially pulling the rug from under our feet. Nature that provides us the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, and the houses we live in. If we do not ensure that the natural capital, that other capital, is invested in equal measure, we, as we are hurtling towards 10 billion at some point, people on this earth, will simply not be able to sustain us. And so it is critical that we understand that it is not a sort of add-on that first we get wealthy and then we invest in nature. We will get wealthy by investing in nature. And smart companies are already seeing this. Look, you can cut the proverbial forest down and have a great quarterly profit, but then what? You can fish the proverbial waters empty and have a great return for your company, but then what? It is about thinking about that longer, deeper term. And it is very interesting to hear Mr. Aslam Khan speak to the investments in the north in restoration of forest cover, the investments in the south with mangroves, because that is infrastructure, but it is nature's infrastructure, protecting us from high storms in the mangroves and providing shelter, etc. And when our economics and our work here shows that for every dollar that we invest in nature, we get an average of $30 back in better health, back in better air quality when we plant trees in cities, back in cooling of our cities, when we do green roofs, back in reduced electricity cuts, electricity costs, and so on and so forth. So it really is critical. And the good thing is, Pakistan and a number of other countries are beginning to understand this, that nature is an asset class that has value, and that by undermining that asset class, we are risking the very future of human civilization. And so, yes, these 3 points that are highlighted are critical. And if I may, just in closing, we heard Mr. Aslam Khan speak to the issue of how in Pakistan we are beginning to see that upward trend on the return of on the inclusive wealth index, which is critical. In the rest of the world, we have doubled our produced capital, our manufactured goods, etc., etc. We have increased by 17% our human capital, so the skills and education, but natural capital has declined by 40%. So when we see in Pakistan an upward tick, that shows that it is possible and that we can lead, but it takes political courage and it takes consistency. And that's what we are calling for across the world.
All right. Coming back to you, Malik, Amin, Aslam Saab, in the report, they also talk about the economy of Pakistan. They talk about the environmental pressures that are on Pakistan, the recent trends in natural capital, as well as the pathways to improvements and restoration efforts. How satisfied are you by all of these points?
Well, I would like to endorse really what Inger just said, that you can become wealthy by investing in nature.
True.
And we have seen it that Pakistan is treading a pathway in which it is investing in nature, and we are getting dividends that we had not planned for. I'll give you an example. You know, in the last week, we have floated our first green bond. It was $500 million. It took us into $1 trillion market where the world wants economic stability as well as green credibility. And our green bond was oversubscribed 6 times. So the appetite in the market was there for this WABDA, investing in hydropower development, for the green, investment to be coming from a credible country. So there is an appetite in the market, and this green bond can be used for other areas such as waste to energy, such as green buildings, and renewable energies, wind and solar also. Secondly, today we launched, with the help of the World Bank, Pakistan's first blue carbon report, and it was really eye-popping because what it stated was that because Pakistan's mangroves have increased with 300% over the last 20 years, today we have almost 5% of the world's blue carbon in Pakistan. And the valuation given to the additional blue carbon that we are adding through the 10 billion tree tsunami is about $500 million. So it's investing in nature, it's unearthing a treasure that we had not valued before, but which now has a value. And in the future, its value will keep on increasing, and the value lies not in destroying nature. The value lies in preserving that nature, in preserving those mangroves. And thirdly, we announced today another very important thing, that we have announced an intent. 3 countries, Germany, Canada, and the UK, have announced an intent to start a dialogue on nature bonds with us. Now that is we are treading into uncharted territories on the nature bond. Because what the nature bond is saying is that the buyer of the bond, or the buyer of that, is not going to be giving you cash. They're going to be paying, or you're buying that nature bond in terms of debt relief. So they'll give you relief in debt in lieu of something that they're getting back in nature. So then the seller, in this case Pakistan, will be not giving back cash, but it will be giving back an investment in nature. So these are things which are happening because we took a pathway, not because we wanted to get these 3 bonds in place, but because we thought it is necessary for our future generations. But when we started doing this, we started getting this dividend back. The other dividend we've got back is green jobs. I mean, we've created 500,000 jobs in the Billion Tree project. Now we've created almost 100,000 jobs in the COVID era for nature jobs, and we are expanding that by another 200,000 by the end of this year. So these are all dividends that come back when you invest in nature.
All right. That is a very important point that you mentioned, and you highlight COVID-19 as well. Now, Inger Andersen, I'd like to ask you the global impact of COVID-19, where on one hand, it has impacted in the lives of millions and millions of people across the globe, and so many have lost their loved ones, and so many have gotten the disease, and now, of course, the vaccines are all across the globe and they are being given to people. But how, in your point of view, has that affected the environment directly and indirectly?
Well, I mean, first of all, sympathies and condolences to all those people who have suffered and continue to suffer under this terrible pandemic. The sad truth is that we need to understand that COVID-19, if that was bad, and it is probably just a little overture to what would happen if we do not get a check on climate change and nature loss. And I don't want to sound alarmist. It's just that if right now we are heading to a 3.5 degree world by 2100 unless we take action, and that is not a world that we can envisage. And that is a world that is flooded, that is a world that is burning, and that is a world that is hot, and where agriculture is not as productive as we need it to be to feed us. So what we learned from COVID is, of course, first of all, that we can change. Overnight, everybody stayed home. Overnight, the world changed. Overnight, we figured out that we wanted to listen to science, the science telling us that we needed to socially distance. We believed the science, and we took action accordingly. And now we are vaccinating because we believe in the science. So on the climate change, clearly, we also saw that all of a sudden our skies were clear just for a moment when everybody was locked in. So what does that tell us? That tells us that it is not inevitably that we live in a pea soup fog. It is not inevitable that we don't hear bird song. It is not inevitable that we continue on this path to destruction. We can actually turn this around. And right now, with the COVID stimulus packages, and we just heard Mr. Aslam Khan refer to some of this work, there is a real opportunity. We are pouring in billions, actually trillions into the economy to restart it. Rich countries pouring a lot into their own economies. But let's recall that it's the 20 richest countries, the G20, that is responsible for nearly 80% of all carbon emissions. So they need to now put that money into green and clean and not into the old ways. And finally, I think what we learned from COVID is COVID-19 is a zoonosis, a zoonotic disease. And whilst we're still looking at the exact origin, let me say this: 75% of all new infectious diseases emerge from zoonotic diseases, i.e. diseases that originate in animals. So the more we encroach into wild areas, the more we trade illegally wildlife, the more unsanitary conditions that we have, the more we do not protect nature, the more likelihood it is that we will get more of these diseases, which we clearly do not want to see. So protecting nature and going green is clearly the way that we have to do now in the wake of COVID.
All right. Malik, Amin, Aslam Saab, moving forward, of course, as Inger has also talked about how important it is to preserve the ecosystem of any country in order to prevent the world from getting diseases such as COVID-19 in the future as well. Whereas you've had the 10 billion tree tsunami program, you've had the national parks and increase in the national parks as well in Pakistan. You've had another program of Recharge Pakistan as well, in which you are combating the effects of flooding that impact Pakistan once every year, especially during the monsoon seasons. How does that impact the inclusive wealth of Pakistan, and how do you foresee the inclusive wealth of Pakistan, which is also part of this very important report that has come out today? Do you feel that the inclusive wealth at the national level, or the growth of the inclusive wealth at the national and the regional level is going at a steady pace due to all the efforts that your government is putting into place?
Well, I think much more needs to be done. I think what is really decisive is that this is the only direction Pakistan can take. We cannot go back to the time of cutting forests and using natural resources inequitably. I think it is important that this is the direction that, as we said, we've bent the curve, but this is the direction that we've set, which is most important and which is the direction that Pakistan has to take if it has to face up to climate change, if it has to have a sustainable future, and if it has to justifiably use its own water resources. So it has set a right direction, but if you think asking me if it is enough, I think it's not enough. We need to do much more, much faster, and invest much more in nature, and keep on going along this nature positive development pathway.
What about the renewable natural resources and the non-renewable resources? Do you feel that the investment by Pakistan in this is moving also in a steady direction?
Yes, I think one of the things which was negative in this report was obviously the agriculture side, that Pakistan has not, and we knew that Pakistan over the last 2 decades has not invested in the agriculture sector, but our government has changed that also. I think if we do a report of 2020, because this one that has till 2018-19, we will see a positive trend. Pakistan, our government, and the results are very evident that in the last year, because of the 2-year investment in agriculture, we got bumper crops in wheat, sugarcane, maize. They're unprecedented, but we need to do more. The second thing this report is talking about is that there was a negative trend in our wetlands. We know that also. So the Recharge Pakistan project is actually designed to address that negativity, designed to use the deluge of the flood waters which comes in 100 days in Pakistan, because we're getting the glacial melting from the north and the monsoons coming from the south. All happens in 100 days. And we get about 100 million acre feet of water which just goes down into the ocean. So we want to use that water, divert it towards wetlands. It will restore the degraded wetlands, which this report shows are degraded, and also recharge the groundwater aquifer, which is going down in Pakistan. So the negative, I think the report, what it shows as negative, are really negative, and I think that our government realized that in the last 2 years, and we have now got initiatives in place which inshallah will take it in the positive direction.
All right. Inga, my last question to you is twofold. The first is the conclusion that, of course, this report takes out, and which talks about the potential of Pakistan's economy to expand and develop sustainably. Largely that depends on the management and investment in its natural capital. Then, of course, that over the past several decades substantial growth has been observed in inclusive wealth, and then, of course, there has been a declining period, but of late there is a lot of effort by the Pakistani government which shows a very positive trend. It also gives 3 main issues to the Pakistani, to the policy makers for developing a framework. Whether it be the policy making decisions, whether it be weighing up decisions on investment and investing on trade-offs, or whether it be the asset side of the national balance sheet that is now expanded to include human capital and natural capital. Do you feel that Pakistan could serve as an example for other countries to follow with this report that has come out today?
Absolutely, and we call on all countries to invest in their natural infrastructure, because as we heard just now, it will bring food security to those that are food insecure. And many countries, unfortunately, are. I'm speaking to you from Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm sitting on a continent where food insecurity is known and where we know that we need to invest in nature's infrastructure. It will bring benefits on climate. It will bring benefits on species extinction, but most of all, it'll bring benefits to reduce poverty and to increase human welfare. And so those dimensions, and of course, therefore, a return to the economy. It is time for us to understand that the very foundation of society is not the bricks and mortar, but it is nature. And so making that shift at the national level in terms of ministerial policies and governmental policy matters. And making the shifts not just in the environment ministry or the climate ministry, but making the shift as a whole of government with a consistency of approach. These should not be political issues. They are intergenerational issues. They are future issues. They are sound economics and sound societal planning, because surely we want that next generation to live as well or even better than we. But right now, the future we are giving them is one that is more food insecure, more climate insecure, and under greater environmental stress. And that is not what we can do. So I do think very much that the putting up its hand that Pakistan has done is that we can turn this around. We will make this national effort of restoring ecosystems, and we are going to make it a consistent policy. I think that that matters greatly. Involving communities so that rights are taken care of, that matters, and this is a global conversation that is to be understood, but ensuring, therefore, that these vast areas that are replanted can be there for generations and ensure longevity and prosperity for the nation. That's what Pakistan has shown us, and that is what we call for the rest of the world to follow.
Of course, and the second part of my question regards the theme of this World Environment Day that Pakistan is hosting, and it is the global host for this World Environment Day, and that is ecosystem restoration. This decade of ecosystem restoration, Inga Andersen, how important is it for the future generation? Because you talk of intergenerational issues and that we need to live for the future generations that are now slowly growing up in an era where there are so many issues that impact the environment around the world. So how important, in your point of view, ma'am, is this decade of ecosystem restoration?
It's absolutely critical. We cannot afford to have so much of our terrestrial and marine surface lying denuded, degraded, and unproductive. We humans have altered more than 70% of the terrestrial surface of this planet, ice-free surface, and that was a good thing. We did it for farming, for infrastructure, etc. But the little that is left, that has to feed us, nurture us, produce our oxygen, do our hydrological cycle, ensure and regulate our climate, that little that is left, we cannot undermine that, because if we do, we are undermining ourselves. So understanding, therefore, that investing in this restoration decade and making it not a government effort, not a scientific effort, not a finance effort, but an all of society effort. Governments, the finance sector, as we just heard some interesting examples from Pakistan with these new bonds, as well as civil society communities. And it needs to have a degree of global solidarity so that in places that are really needing international support, and here I'm speaking of the Sahel in Africa as an example, that support reaches. That's what we need to do, because we cannot risk pulling that proverbial rug from under so many people's feet. What we need to do is to ensure that we have that intergenerational equity. So at the United Nations General Assembly in 2018, this decade was declared the ecosystem decade for restoration. And together with our friends at FAO, we are, with United Nations Environment Program, co-facilitating that. But we want to crowd in everyone. And that's what we are seeking to do. And when we launch this decade tomorrow, that's what we will create, this global movement. All the financiers, but all the governments and communities across the world can do something. And every individual can do something. Cities and green matters also, and we can do a lot in our immediate neighborhoods. That's what we need to call for across the globe.
Thank you very much, Inga Andersen, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, for joining us from Nairobi in Kenya, for your very, very eminent point of view on this issue that not only plagues Pakistan but the world at large. Coming back to you, Malik, Amin, Aslam Saab, we have of course understood how Pakistan is important, how it is moving forward as far as alleviating the changes that are being put forward or being brought upon by climate change. And of course, the World Environment Day is a day that makes us remember what we have done and what we need to do. Amongst all the efforts that the Pakistani government and your ministry have undertaken, whether it be the 10 billion tree tsunami, the national parks, Recharge Pakistan, Blue Bond, Nature Bond, Green Bonds, electric car policy, no plastic policy, and so on and so forth, and so many other programs that are in the pipeline, how much do you feel Pakistan is going to strengthen itself as a role model for other countries to follow?
Well, I think Pakistan has done a lot because we have a leadership which is totally committed to this thing. It's a rarity to have a leader like our Prime Minister Imran Khan in a developing country who's willing to not only talk the talk but also walk the talk by putting money, by putting budgets on the line to make sure we are investing in the right sort of development program. And this leadership can only come if it has a vision beyond the next election or beyond the next 2 years. It's a long-term vision, and usually politicians don't have long-term visions because they think about the next 2 years and what they can quickly give back to the electorate and then win the next election. But this is a leader who's thinking about the next generation, about Pakistan's future in the next next coming century. So I think that is a rarity, and we are glad that Pakistan is taking full advantage of that. And we are doing a lot of steps which I said are being done because they are in Pakistan's interests. They are in the interests of Pakistan's people and our future generations. So this resetting the relationship with nature, all the policies that you talked about, they are all being done for
so many that we haven't talked about.
So many that we haven't talked about are all because it is in Pakistan's interest to do so. And in doing so, Pakistan is becoming a role model because very few developing countries actually go this pathway because sometimes you don't spend money on this because you see a quick fix somewhere, or you want to do go the polluted route, which may be the least cost route option apparently. But as I said, this only happens if you have a leadership with a vision, and we are lucky to have that in Pakistan.
All right, and finally, do we foresee any important measures such as those that have been brought forward, and I have not talked about the Ecosystem Restoration Fund or the phasing out dependence on fossil fuels or other issues that Pakistan is working upon? Should we also look forward to other such measures that we have just noted down? And giving an example for maybe other countries that have put more dependence on fossil fuel, that have put more dependence or maybe coal related generation and so on and so forth. Do you feel that now that Pakistan is the global host of this World Environment Day, that the message will go across to the world that Pakistan is one developing country that is striving hard to make the change that should be followed by others?
Yes, definitely. The message has already gone out. The message has gone out that nature-based solutions work. Nature-based solutions provide you a sustainable pathway for development. And the message has gone out because a lot of countries have followed the example. The 10 billion name has actually become a brand. We've got the UK government, the New Zealand government, some governments in Africa, I think Ethiopia, the Saudi Arabia government, all of them have announced 10 billion or billion tree projects all over the world. And this shows that there is a gravitas in this in what we are doing over here in Pakistan, because we are showing this results on the ground, and it has come with a lot of dividends. It's opening up doors for green diplomacy in Pakistan. This is one of the subjects that always comes up when our Prime Minister talks to the head of leaders, the leaders of or the head of governments in different countries, because this is something that the world also cares about. What Pakistan is doing is not only good for Pakistan, it is also necessary for the world to survive. We need trees in the world, and climate action has to be a collective action. It cannot be taken by one country in isolation. All countries need to get together, but the world needs to step forward and help countries like Pakistan who want to go on this pathway. I'll give you an example. We have decided not to go with imported coal projects. We shelved 2 projects which were signed, financially closed, and we went towards the hydropower development project pathway. Now there are some projects in which we are there, which are there for the next 30 years in Pakistan. Now if Pakistan wants to decide to move out of those projects, there is a financial cost involved. There is a barrier to exit when you want to go out of fossil fuels. That barrier to exit, I think, is something that the world community needs to address when it sees countries, committed countries like Pakistan, going the right pathway, but having roadblocks like this.
All right. Finally, you talked about countries of the world working together. When it comes to global partnerships to address climate change or public-private partnership in countries such as Pakistan, how important is that?
That is very important because, you know, in the environmental arena, there is a very strong slogan that you have to think global but act local. That is a very simple but very strong message. That no matter what you do at the local level would become meaningless if at the global level everybody else is doing the wrong thing. So you have to think at a global level, and then the other side is also true, that you can keep on thinking at the global level, but it would not matter if you don't act at the local level. So you have to do both things. You have to show your performance on the ground, like Pakistan, but you also have to wake up the global conscience at a global level, again, like Pakistan is doing.
Thank you very much, Malik, Amin, Aslam Saab, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister and Federal Minister on Climate Change. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the tomorrow is going to be the World Environment Day, and today's this report, this very important report, has come out that shows how Pakistan has moved forward and what needs to be further done in order for Pakistan to be an example for other countries to follow. Also, on the World Environment Day, now that Pakistan is hosting this global event with the theme of ecosystem restoration, Pakistan has shown the world that thinking global and acting local is something that any country can do if it has the right determination, if it has the right passion, and if it moves in the right direction with a team that is meant to bring change in the country, in nature, and in the environment of that particular country, and of course serve as an example for others to follow. With that, we come to an end of this special episode of Newsroom. We'll see you, inshallah, with more stories that matter to you, to us, and to Pakistan. Nevertheless, take forward the message that has come across through this program, through Mr. Aslam and through Inger Andersen, and try to make a change on a personal level as well. To bring a change at a personal level, you will strengthen your society and make Pakistan a country for others to follow suit. Allah Hafiz.